Hey everyone, Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. More developments in free agency, especially at the wide receiver position. We talk about Christian Kirk and DK Metcalf and what that could mean for the future of the Steelers receiver room and my top 10 cornerbacks in this NFL draft class, all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. Okay, Steelers fans, let's get to the big news that happened on Wednesday, Wednesday. And that is that there are two more receivers added to the free agency pool. Again, this is why every year we say, hey, when you're thinking about free agency in January and even in February, cool your jets. Wait till we actually see what the pool is. And now it's starting to come closer and closer into view. One thing happened, Christian Kirk released. Now, we had a sense that this was probably going to happen just because of his contract with the Jacksonville Jaguars, but now it definitely does. Of course, Christian Kirk, guy that they signed back in 2022 to be their future wide receiver, had done solidly well for them over the years there. He had an 1,100-year season receiving yards in 2022 with them when he was 26 years old, had 8 touchdowns that year, but since then hasn't played a full season, had 12 games in 2023 where he pulled out 787 yards and just 3 receiving touchdowns. And then last year he missed pretty much half the season playing in only 8 games with 379 yards and a single touchdown as the Jaguars offense continued to fall further into disarray. But of course, as we know, the Steelers, it's a bit well-known rumor here, we're interested in trading for Christian Kirk around the time of the trade deadline. And we're probably in position to do so until he suffered his season-ending injury. And that kept him from being a person that the Steelers wanted to bring onto the roster. So naturally, with Christian Kirk ready to hit free agency after being cut by the Jaguars, he should be a target. Now, the question you probably have is, what kind of target is he? Is he a number 1 that would take over the spot from George Pickens? Absolutely not. But is he a number 2? Yes. And he's a better number 2 than they've had in a while. And he would be another guy that could work for the ball downfield, still has really good athleticism. He's 28 years old. He's an experienced vet. He could bring that experience to the room, be that kind of a guy who can be a playmaker for your offense and, bring a nice compliment to George Pickens while you still have your speedsters like Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson has a chance. And you could still draft a guy in the first, second, or third rounds in this draft class and feel really good about it. And I think Christian Kirk makes a lot of sense if you're the Steelers and you want to get a guy. You probably wouldn't have to pay him as much. If you look at how his contract played out with the Jaguars, he was initially a $7.5 million cap hit in 2022 that jumped up to 11.4, but this was a backloaded contract because his cap number this year was going to be $24.2 million, and that's just a lot of money to be shelling out for a guy that only had one receiving year with over 1,000 yards receiving. And then he was also a $24 million cap hit this year. So they're parting ways with him for that reason. But again, the Steelers don't have to sign for that high much of a price. They can figure out their own price to get with him. And I think that with his experience, when you look at that, at his number, anywhere from $8 to $12 million a year, I think would be a solid way to get a veteran like that, add him to the team, make him a reliable playmaker in your offense. And that could solve a big hole or fill a big hole in your wide receiver plan. But he's not the only guy who became available, at least by public and people putting the news out there. And of course, DK Metcalf, another guy, 28 years old, who's become available. Now, DK Metcalf is a horse of a different color because he's 6'4", he's an athletic freak, and he needs to be traded away from the Seahawks. There's talks that now he's been able to open up the trade market, and now teams are going to be looking at him very, very hard. Now, DK Metcalf, a little bit more dominant than Christian Kirk. He's a 2-time Pro Bowler. He's had 3,000 plus yard seasons. Was 8 yards shy of making it a 4th season this last year, and he's had a lot more touchdowns in his career. He's been a big time playmaker, and he's been that guy. And now he's getting ready. He's getting ready to end into the final year of his deal currently with the Seahawks, and he's looking around and saying like, "Whoop, I don't have, it's like, they're not looking to extend me for this kind of money, so let's try to figure something out." And now he gets to go explore the trade market. Now, the question will be, do the Steelers want to trade for him? Now, what are the factors here as far as getting a DK Metcalf? Well, factors are you get a big playmaking guy. He could play on the outside. He could, if you lined him up with George Pickens, maybe he is the number one over George Pickens, but you at least kind of have two number ones in that situation. But either way, look at DK Metcalf's numbers. Over the past several years, he's caught 5 or more touchdowns every single year he's been in the league. That's something that Christian Kirk only did 3 times in his 7 years so far. So DK Metcalf definitely a better player in that regard. And again, who the Steelers pick at quarterback will be the priority before figuring out wide receiver, and they'll inform their wide receiver decisions based off of who they think they're going to be able to keep at quarterback. But DK Metcalf, I know a lot of people are going to say, "Oh, well, if they sign DK Metcalf, they sign DK Metcalf, it means definitely Russell Wilson's going to be back for the Steelers." And I'm not ruling that out, but I also think DK Metcalf is a uniquely good enough receiver that doesn't necessarily need to be connected to Russell Wilson. They could get DK Metcalf and bring in Daniel Jones, and he'd still be the guy that you want him to be on the outside. So to me, I think that if they're looking at DK Metcalf, the question then becomes, what would you trade to get him? Because remember, that's what's happening here. They're saying, hey, we're putting him on the trade market. Now, if you're the Steelers, you have to ask yourself, what do you want to pay for a guy with 1 year left on his deal? According to at least overthecap.com, the current construction of his deal means that that the Seahawks would get about $10.8 million not owed on his contract. That's the part that should transfer to the Steelers if they were to trade for him. If that's the case, and DK Metcalf is able to be traded for because the Seahawks are trying to offload money and they're trying to fix some other things, I don't think it's a bad idea to be looking at trying to take advantage of that, because if you can try to find a way to just give up a day 3 pick and get a player like DK Metcalf, granted a rental, granted all these other things, that's a major opportunity for you to upgrade your wide receiver room. And I think that's what the Steelers have to look at here is these two specifically. I think these are different than the Brandon Ayuk, the Deebo Samuels, the name a rumor in Pittsburgh around a wide receiver. And you could probably, get back to my and the next day meme. And I know there's probably some people thinking, Chris, you're the one talking about free agent wide receivers again. I know, but this is what we do. We react to the news. And I want to give some thoughts here as far as what direction, if the Steelers were to go in either of these directions, if they had Christian Kirk or DK Metcalf, and those were your options, and they chose one way or the other, what that would say about what the Steelers are trying to do, not just with George Pickens, but with this offense moving forward. We'll do that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I remind you this show is brought to you by Chewy. You've probably heard of Chewy. They really do have everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. Whether you're shopping for food, treats, or even in pet health care, Chewy makes it fast, easy, and affordable. With over 100,000 products from all your favorite brands, Chewy has everything your pet needs, from food and treats to toys, beds, and grooming. And it's not just for dogs and cats. They've got supplies for birds, fish, reptiles, and small pets too. Chewy has also makes it easy to manage your pet's health with prescriptions, telehealth vet visits, and even in-person vet clinics rolling out nationwide. AutoShip is a game changer. You can set up an automatic deliveries for food, treats, or any essentials so that you never run out. You can easily change or cancel at any time. When you look at Chewy, you can look at how it makes managing your pet care easier, because you never run out of the essentials, easy access to the vet care, and everything delivered right to your door. Chewy has everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. Right now, you can save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewy.com, or visit the link in the description here. You can remember, you save $20 on your first order with free shipping by clicking the link in the description. Minimum purchase required. New customers only. Terms and conditions apply. See site for complete details. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. So I broke down both of who these two wide receivers were. And I'm spending more time talking about this because I think either one of these options are a lot more real as a potential wide receiver for the Steelers than a lot of the names that we brought up. And why? Well, partially because of the fit and where they are. Like a lot of people want to talk about older wide receivers. This is the sweet spot. Late 20s, experienced, coming from success, can build off of it and put things forward. Now, the thing is, though, these are two different types of receivers, and if the Steelers get one versus the other, it's going to tell me a lot about their plans moving forward with their offense, and specifically with George Pickens. And I'll explain this in a second. Excuse me, I'm sipping a lot of water because I've been needing to hydrate better. But looking at these two wide receivers, if the Steelers get Christian Kirk, the offense is going to be well complemented. It's going to be well. He's going to add to the full wide receiver package. They might also draft a receiver high, but he's going to be that voice in the room that can be solid vet, that can lead it, that can lead the people who want to be led, and can also be solid behind or next to George Pickens, because George Pickens is still going to be the number one wide receiver on this team so long as he's on this team, and that's where the Steelers have to figure out what their plan is, because if George Pickens is going to be the number one wide receiver, he's still going to need another number two. And that's something that we've talked about a lot, right? Like the Steelers tried. They went and looked for options, they struck out, and it just didn't work out for them in that situation. But this year they have a better chance to make amends for that and go get their guy at wide receiver. And so if you go with Christian Kirk, you're getting a solid wide receiver too. Don't think it'll make a whole lot of noise, and I think it'll be a solid I think it'd be a solid addition to, again, fully complement the rest of the room. However, if the Steelers were to get on this trade market and get DK Metcalf from the Seahawks, I don't think it would be like that. I don't think that they would put DK Metcalf and George Pickens to coexist on the same offensive roster for very long. If they went after a DK Metcalf, they'd probably give him an extension from his current deal, because his deal will be up this season. They would probably, get him to become a leader more on the team with his experience. And if they're doing all that, George Pickens is going to be looking at this whole thing sideways, because he's like, hey, I'm the number one guy. And he's also got to ask, what's the plan for paying him? Because remember, George Pickens' contract is up after next season. So I think if you're getting DK Metcalf, you're putting yourself in the position where George Pickens, if he sees that, there's going to be some questions about what the priority is. And is he still a priority? And listen, George Pickens needs to grow up and be better about the things that he needs to be better about. But I don't think you trade for DK Metcalf if you're not also trying to find a trade partner for George Pickens. And I look at DK Metcalf and think he's a pure number one wide receiver. The personality he brings, everything he brings to the table. I personally think this is a move. This further shows me Christian Kirk is probably the plan for the Steelers. But if it doesn't go well enough, if they feel like, well, it's not working, it's not looking great, DK Metcalf could be that number one wide receiver. And if he is, you trade away George Pickens. Why? Because now you can say you got your veteran wide receiver. You can draft a receiver early. You can you could build your team to have a younger receiving core, reset with the leadership of the veteran of your choice, which is DK Metcalf. And that's where I look at the potential for the Steelers offense to kind of be in an interesting spot there, because it's not always fresh and front and center about what is going on, right? Like there's not always a full story that you're able to comprehend about why negotiations are. That's why whenever you hear someone say, "Oh, the Steelers were in on name a player, this guy over here, that guy over there," and half of them are just like, no, they weren't in on it. You called them or they called you briefly, and it was just a yes or no, and you hung up, and that was that. Like, let's not pretend that that's not what happens a lot of times behind the scenes in negotiations, and people pretend like they know things. But for DK Metcalf to be a Steeler, there's going to have to be some serious questions. What do the Seahawks want? what do the Seahawks want in the trade market? Do they want a third? Do they want a second? Do they want a fourth? I think with the money that they'd be offloading, the Steelers or whoever they would trade for DK Metcalf, it would behoove them to note that this is a money move to clear up cap space. And so if that's the case, use that as leverage to lower down the asking price. If the Steelers found, I don't think the DK Metcalf, with the talent the Steelers have, I don't think DK Metcalf is the person that's going to be it's going to flip everything upside down necessarily. But I do think, and that's why I think they are going to go with Christian Kirk, because they would have to then shell out picks to get him, which would impact their draft plan. Now, again, if they get him for a third or a fourth, maybe we're talking something else there. But I still think the obvious option is the guy who is available to you right now. If you were to open up free agency, that's Christian Kirk, because he's the number 2 receiver behind George. You could draft another young wide receiver behind them. You still have Calvin Austin. You'd have him for another year before you have to figure out what you're doing with him. There's a lot of different moving pieces that can happen here. And DK Metcalf could be a part of it, but I still think it might be a better option to go with Christian Kirk, at least for right now. I think DK Metcalf is a heck of an athlete and heck of a player. And if Steelers wound up getting him, there'd be a lot of excitement. And heck, I would welcome it, because it would be nice to talk about that and not have to wonder about that anymore. But if you're looking at things and you're from the Steelers perspective and you're thinking like, hey, you still got to make sure Russell Wilson or Justin Fields signs so that you can get the right guy. I think DK Metcalf, again, transcends the type of quarterback that he would help. He's not saying that he's not limited to just one type of person. I think he's a kind of an every down player, every series player. If you're DK Metcalf, like, you're not worried about where he's lining up. You're just telling him you're just telling him, hey, go out there and do your thing. So I really do think DK Metcalf, it'd be awesome if the Steelers got him. And if you got him and you got Russell Wilson, or even if you got Justin Fields, great, cool. But I don't think that that's the move the Steelers would find the most prudent, unless the price was so low. If like it's a 4th round to pick DK Metcalf for a year, fine, go get it. Do you think? If it's a 4th round pick, if it's just a day 3 pick, you're fine there. But if you're the Steelers and the Seahawks are asking high, and Christian Kirk is there, and you still have George Pickens under contract, and you can still draft a guy in the 2nd round who could become one of those big playmakers, I don't see the need to necessarily try to trade too much and also have to commit to paying DK Metcalf. That's the other part of this. DK Metcalf isn't Christian Kirk, in the sense that DK Metcalf, I said that Christian Kirk last year was a $24.2 million cap hit. DK Metcalf this year was set to be a $31.8 million cap hit in 2025. That's part of what's going on here, and so that's why things are moving here. So if you're the Steelers, I get that DK Metcalf is the shiny, attractive piece, but if you get DK Metcalf, you're probably trading away George Pickens and you're flipping everything upside down, anyways. But what if you just got Christian Kirk, who provided you a lot of really good intel? Who comes in and he's helping you. He's helping you kind of reshape your wide receiver room, bring in that veteran presence, and you're not giving up draft picks for him. You're probably paying him $8 to $12 million, not somewhere upwards of $20 million a year, and which is what you'd have to pay DK Metcalf if you traded him. That's why I think that there's 2 different ways to go about this. Now, some people might say, hey, blow up the wide receiver room, and welcome DK Metcalf to the situation. I just don't think that's what the Steelers are going to do, which is why I'm saying now that Christian Kirk is officially released, that's the guy I'm looking at as to be one of the first Steelers signings of free agency, to get that done, to get him in the building and get to work with him. So you got my opinions there. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about my cornerback rankings. That's right, cornerback in the NFL draft. In the NFL draft, we're starting to assemble the big boards. I've got my look here on a piece that's going to appear in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. So get all of that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, continuing our show here on the Steelers. And we've talked a lot of free agency. I want to talk a little bit of draft again. And I'm not going to get into the weeds of, pulling up videos and listening to guys talk about stuff today. I'm going to talk about my rankings because my first rankings of my big boards have just been released by the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. That should be up sometime this Thursday. So check it out if you haven't already. I created a top 10 list of the cornerbacks the Steelers should be looking at here. Of course, first and foremost would be Travis Hunter, but because he would just be a player that we just don't think is going to be anywhere near where the Steelers can even trade up for. Travis Hunter's not a priority now, but after that, that's where it starts to get tricky. And I through my rankings, and I'm going to break them down like step by step. My top cornerback after Travis Hunter, so this would be number 2, 3, and 4. Jahdae Barron, Will Johnson, and Darian Porter. Now, Jahdae Barron, as we've talked about before, was very impressed with him at the Combine. He spoke very well for himself. He talked about a lot of good things. He was able to break things down and show how well of a football thinker that he is in the moment. And to me, that's really impressive. I made my NFL comp Brian Branch in the when I was putting this together for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and again, read all my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com, including my top 10 rankings of cornerbacks in this draft class. But Will Johnson right behind Jahdae Barron, more of the prototypical cornerback. He's more of a 62. He's a 6'2" guy. I think the one thing though is that they're trying to see if he'll test at his pro day. He did not test at the Combine. Will Johnson, heck of a playmaker. He has lots of pick sixes to his name. He's a very aggressive corner, and I think that attracts people. But he would be my number 3 guy in that situation at cornerback. Right behind him though is a very interesting physical presence, and this is a guy who could project to try to be like the anti-DK Metcalf if they ever matched up with him. And that name is Darian Porter. Now, Darian Porter is from Iowa State. He was 6'3", 200. And Porter had been he was already one of the tallest cornerbacks, but in the Combine, when you looked at his times, at his 40-yard dash, at his 20-yard shuttle, you saw this guy not only was tall, but he was fast and he was quick. And then when you look at his tape, he plays the ball well. He steps in the hip pocket well. I know there's some people that are down on him because he does have flaws to his game, but man, the upside of getting a guy who's almost 6'4", 200 pounds, and you're able to do all these different things and address this kind of stuff. I think it shows that if you're able to focus and get a guy like Darian Porter, you'd be very happy with it because he'd be another tall, long, fast, athletic guy here. Now, I don't think he's the best comparison to Joey Porter Jr. in this class. I think if there is a guy, it's my next cornerback, which is Azareye'h Thomas. Now, if you've been familiar with Azareye'h Thomas out of Florida State, 6'2", 198, very similar build to Joey Porter Jr., and plays very similar as well when you look at when you look at how well he plays with his back to the ball. He doesn't rack up interception numbers, but he does rack up good coverage reps, and that's something that can't be undervalued. Azareye'h Thomas is in a really good spot, in my opinion. Behind, if you're counting people outside of Travis Hunter, he's my number 4 cornerback. Next on the list, though, is my number 5 quarterback. That's Trey Amos out of Ole Miss. Now, Amos, I really like his instincts because he can play man, he can play zone, he can flip between, and he doesn't really freak out when he does that. And that's something that the Steelers need. They need communicators. They need guys who can play different roles, play different schemes, and jump around them. That's where the Steelers, I think, could get some help there as far as they want a versatile corner who could play zone and man. Granted, I think a lot of these guys could, but that would be the experience that I think Trey Amos would have to offer in that situation. And why, I think Carlton Davis, because of his size, is a really interesting comparison. But we'll see how that plays out. Next up was at number 6 without Travis Hunter, number 7 with Travis not Travis Hunter, excuse me. Travis Hunter. Number 6 on my list here at cornerbacks is Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky. I know there's a lot of people that are high on Maxwell Hairston because he's quick, he's fast, and he blew up the combine with a 4.28 time in the 40-yard dash. That was really impressive. But I just watching his tape, I saw more holes in his ability to cover than I saw in a lot of these top guys. It's not a bad thing, but at 6'1", 186, he's a lighter cornerback. I think he would need to get a little bit tougher. And again, he's quick, nimble, he's fast. He can get a lot of those things done. But Maxwell Hairston, I think that he is a guy who tests very well, but the tape makes me at least wonder about some things. So if I'm putting too much scrutiny on some of the tape that I saw that wasn't great, then that might be on me. But Maxwell Hairston, I think he's a good player. I think he's a very good player, and he has a chance to be a starting quarterback in the NFL who's pretty good as well. But just looking at where Maxwell Hairston is in this class, I put him at 6 there. At 7, I got Siobhan Revell, cornerback out of East Carolina, 6'3", 194, bigger guy. I think he's been pretty solid. I got to be honest, I didn't get a chance to watch a lot of him because he played for Eastern Carolina. It's not a lot of tape in that department, but he didn't test at the combine. And one of the things, if you don't know anything about Siobhan Revell, is that when he came from JUCO to go play at East Carolina, they had him at a combine. They said he ran a 4.4 flat and jumped extremely well at the tests when he first arrived at East Carolina. And that was before he got the training and the daily stuff. And so I think that there's room for stuff for Siobhan Revell. I also need to watch more tape on him to fully evaluate all his strengths and weaknesses. So there you have it. There's 7. At 8, I got Benjamin Morrison at Notre Dame. Now, what's funny is, it's not funny, it's unfortunate, but what's unfortunate is that if this was a few months ago, Benjamin Morrison was probably going to be Benjamin, he's probably going to be like a top 10, top 15 pick. If you look at his ball skills, they're insane. Like his ability to play the ball when he's healthy, it has been a problem. Now, the thing is, it's been a problem. And I think that's where, he gets hip surgery. You're wondering about what's going to happen with that. Can he flip his hips as well? Can he turn directions as well? And that's where I think there could be some issues for Benjamin Morrison. It's why he's fallen so far. But hey, if the Steelers think that he's fallen far enough and they can make the best out of it, go right ahead. I think that he'd be still a dangerous option to add. Two more players here, excuse me. Jacob Parrish out of Kansas State. Now, I talked to Jacob Parrish at the combine. He told me straight up, he's like, look, I'm a slot corner through and through. That's why I put him further down here. But the Steelers need slot corners. They need guys who can patrol, who can stop, top turn, get something going. I think that's where Jacob Parrish fits in very well. He might be the best pure slot corner in this draft class, and that's something to make note of. Dorian Strong out of Virginia Tech, my last cornerback in my top 10 here. Again, it excludes Travis Hunter because we're assuming that he's going to be picked up right away. But I think that, when you look at Dorian Strong, there's some questions about his usage and how he's been, but there's no questions about his athleticism and his work ethic. And those are the things that shine through. So there you have it. Dorian Strong is my last receiver on my top 10 list. That excludes Travis Hunter because of just how high up in value he is there. Let me know if there's any switching around that you would do of those cornerbacks. We will keep it here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We got one more episode this week for Friday. Be sure to tune in for that. We hope to have we hope to get some guests in for that. We're going to try. We got a lot going on right now. But we hope that you're enjoying the show on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Remember, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, and all the places. Same handle every time, at Carter Critiques. Read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here every Monday through Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your episodes of the Locked On Steelers podcast.